Labour's manifesto is a manifesto for hope. That is what this document is. A manifesto that will bring real change. A manifesto that's full of popular policies that the political establishment has blocked for a generation. But you can't have it. At least that's what the most powerful people in Britain and their supporters want you to believe. Over the next 3 weeks, they're going to tell you that everything in this manifesto is impossible, that it's too much for you, because they do not want real change in this country. Why would they? The system is working just fine for them. It's rigged in their favor. But it's not working for you.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I am Michael Brooks. We are broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA. Fighting the good fight with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
On this week's program, the great, the mega-talented Nina Turner. Senator Nina Turner, co-chair of the Bernie Sanders campaign. My sincere wish, the next vice president of the United States. She's joining us. We're talking about what's going on the campaign trail, the state of the race, movement politics, what it takes to beat Trump. Why are teachers, Walmart, and Amazon workers the biggest donors to Bernie, and the steady Bernie surge? Very excited to talk to Nina Turner. And then, finally, the return in studio of the amazing Milton Allimadi. He is the founder and publisher of Black Star News. We're talking about the situation in Uganda. He's going to give us an illicit history of NATO's destruction of Libya, what it teaches us about the world today, the ongoing ramifications of that brutal disaster. And he is going to stay with us through the postgame. We are going to learn so much from Milton, as we always do. It's time to get serious about electing Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, destroying the Lib Dems, saving the UK from Boris Tory delusion destruction. And just to do that, the Labour Party has put forward some of the most dynamic and interesting policy ideas in a generation, and an incredible manifesto that could be a blueprint for the left globally. We're going to be talking about that in the Gem. Glenn Greenwald gets a shout out as Lula, freed political prisoner Lula da Silva, promises to make life a living hell for the clown fascists running Brazil. And in the post game, we've got some sounds from the UK. We've got multiple stories to cover, how to think about the intelligence apparatus, impeachment, Donald Trump, and how to beat them all, how to truly, finally drain the swamp. An update from coup Bolivia, where the coup government has promised elections that will exclude the legitimate president and his party. All that and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show. But first, let's talk about the age of humanism. Is it coming back, or has it ended permanently? Now, obviously, I don't think it's ended permanently, or I wouldn't be doing this show. I wouldn't have optimism about the state of the human race. But there's no question that this global authoritarian trend is real, it's prevalent, and it's causing an unbelievable amount of human suffering across the globe. Donald Trump is operating concentration camps, ripping families apart. Duterte is fighting a brutal campaign that targets the underclass in the guise of a drug war. Jair Bolsonaro is empowering an incredibly violent security, policing, and paramilitary sources to escalate a racialized and underclass war in Brazil. There was a coup in Bolivia. The far right governs Hungary. The far right governs Russia. The far right governs India. This is a real trend. It governs the United States and it governs the UK. The clownish behavior of many of these leaders, with the exceptions of Modi, Erdogan, and Putin, who at least have a certain efficacy. Netanyahu, depending on the day, can go in between effective apartheid authoritarian or a clown fascist as he struggles under this recent indictment. But that cannot obscure the fact of the unbelievable amount of suffering that is being inflicted on the LGBT community, the structural assault on labor, the indigenous, the poor, minorities of every possible background, and the structural war against a pluralistic society. But all of this cultural focus should not obscure the fundamental class dynamics that drive this politics. And that's not disconnected from recognizing that the disaster of neoliberalism of the past several decades, which first of all set in place the precursors to all of these policies. You could not have the Trump on war on immigration if Bill Clinton did not sign vindictive, cruel, and punitive immigration legislation in 1996, if Democrats did not go along with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and ICE, and if Barack Obama did not ramp up deportations. So while Trump is of a different kind, is not the same thing, all of the stages were set by neoliberalism. And the other thing that neoliberalism set, and it was noted recently by even Joschka Fischer, the former German foreign minister who went from 60s radical to ultra promoter of internationalist liberalism and elitist multilateralism, that the focus on "it's the economy, stupid" distracted from people's sense of needing to have meaning and purpose in their lives. This is what the anthropologist Scott Atran talks about when he documents why young people join extremist movements, whether it be the alt-right or ISIS. So there is a dual function here. There's serious material deprivation and instability and immiseration, which is accelerated by deregulated aggressive capitalism, which is essentially just exporting back home what it had exported overseas to the periphery through World Bank and IMF programs, coming back home, implementing vicious anti-labor and austerity budgets, causing rage, causing humiliation, causing anger, causing suffering, without any proper answers from almost all mainstream center-left parties. And then at the same time, people were told to simply max out their credit cards, consume and consume and consume, and that there was no real purpose in life. Nothing other than to be an economic animal. The right, the smart global authoritarian right, has recognized both of these dimensions and has provided disastrous, horrifying, and wrong answers, but they've been asking the right questions, unlike the neoliberals who set the stages. Now, Achille Mbembe is a Cameroonian philosopher who's had a very big influence on me, and I want to quote from an indispensable essay he wrote in 2016 called "The Age of Humanism is Ending." Neoliberal capitalism has left in its wake a multitude of destroyed subjects, many of whom are deeply convinced that their immediate future will be one of continuous exposure to violence and existential threat. They genuinely long for some sense of certainty, the sacred, hierarchy, religion, and tradition. They believe nations have become akin to swamps that need to be drained, and the world as it is should be brought to an end. For this to happen, everything should be cleansed of. They are convinced that they can only be saved by violent struggle to restore their masculinity, the loss of which they attribute to the weaker among them, the weak they do not want to become. Neoliberalism destroyed communities. It atomized people. It still atomizes people to this day. The very functionality of this technology does precisely that by unregulated authoritarian tech companies, which, even as Joschka Fischer said, again, certainly no great progressive leader with a very checkered record, but he's, even as he was strongly criticizing the Chinese model, said, I wouldn't put my faith in California for democracy either. Let's be real. The collective became the individual. Concretely, social welfare was destroyed, and more of our lives have become seen as commodities rather than needs to be met. The project put into place during the neoliberalism left ready-made apparatus for the right wing to use, and they're using it with brutal efficiency, while all too much of the center and the left has not provided a powerful material vision or figured out a way to synthesize a new vision of openness, pluralism, and democracy that addresses the ravages of various forms of fundamental bigotries and oppressions without further atomizing and separating the ability to have a cohesive movement and a broader sense that everybody desires of some type of community, purpose, and shared vision. There's no contradiction there. And that needs to be provided. You see it to some extent in the Sanders movement. You certainly see it in President Lula. You see it in Cornel West. You see it in fact, Nina Turner, who we'll be talking to. But we need to hone that vision. Achille Mbembe warned that the transformation of the political into business raises the risks of the elimination of the very possibility of politics. This is the task ahead of us. Reclaim the political from business and change individual consciousness into collective consciousness so we can build a future for the many. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I would just add very quickly that this is exactly the project that the right wing has always wanted, that was implemented by the neoliberal apparatuses that really created the foundations that you see somebody like Trump that is using so effectively today. So just to be a little bit clear about that, Donald Trump is very famous for being an absolute idiot and a fool and somebody who's unable to implement a lot of the policies that he wants. But when you look at what he actually has been able to accomplish, those were things that he inherited from previous administrations, and he's been able to use them with brutal efficiency. When he wants to create something new, he's not very able to do it, but he's able to harness popular anger and frustration and turn it and use it in the most wicked fashion, using tools that have been given to him by the previous neoliberal order.
Absolutely.
You know, just that kind of makes me think of this thing. You know how certain phrases stick in your mind? Like, for instance, when we were talking about Trump in 2015, we would make the comparison, like, are we going to be like the liberals in Weimar Germany who left as Hitler rose? And like, that's, I can't forget having that conversation. Yes. Immediately I'm like, yeah. But even like, as I was saying, I'm like, oh, I'm probably going to remember this. Right. Oh shit, I forgot. Never mind. Let's move on.
Wait. You don't have anything, or were you going to play something?
I was trying
to
forget your play something else, but I forgot what I was trying to jump off of Griscom's point from, so I apologize. What?
It's all good. The point is, don't be like Weimar Germany.
Oh, yeah. So David Plotz said at one time, like in 2008, I was listening to the awful Slate Political Gabfest. It was the early days as far as podcasts go, folks.
The aptly named David Plotz.
But he was making a case, actually, that was fairly well observed, in that, like, Obama's creating all this, like the drone, is specifically about the drone warfare.
Right.
And it's like, well, God forbid someone worse comes in after Obama, and everyone's just like, I mean, it probably wouldn't be that bad, right? Like, it might be Romney or something like that. And I can't get that rings in my ears.
That rings, and that's also what was so incredible of how many people who now kind of fetishize institutionalism. That was their answer to a systemic institutional critique of the Obama administration running a global unchecked drone war. He seems like a nice guy.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously.
And
how bad could it get?
Also, like Keith Ellison predicting Trump might win is another.
Keith Ellison got laughed in his face. By the way, Keith Ellison gave we talked about Ilhan Omar, of course, stole the show at the Minnesota rally. Keith Ellison gave an amazing speech for Bernie, and I am so glad that he's the Attorney General. We need people in those positions.
Well, because if we allow these projects to continue, then the worst kind of people are going to come and take advantage of the chaos. So it's like, we've had years of atomization. People have been thinking of themselves as individuals. The society has been completely destroyed for most people, right? Like Margaret Thatcher's like dream of the end of society, like very much was happening all across the world. And then you have somebody like Trump or any fascist. What they do is they tell these people, it's like, oh no, you're not just like a depressed worker or whatever. You're a member of a great nation state, and you're a member of a great race, and you're going to, steamroll everyone else. And it pulls people into their thrall. I mean, obviously it's a complete fantasy, and it's used to destroy, obviously, the targets of the vitriol and hatred, but also the communities that these people are coming from themselves. And, it's just something that neoliberals are never going to be able to get us out of this crisis because they created the conditions that allowed the crisis to come into being in the first place.
They don't have any meaning. They don't have answers on meaning and community, and they don't have answers on inequality and materiality. And those are the two. You need a healthy, pluralistic, open, democratic alternative on community and continuity that also recognizes those things as actual important human needs that can't just be shuttled off to tech and capital. And then you need to reverse fundamentally the human devastation. And they have answers, and not only don't they have answers on either, they're wrong. And yes, every country has its own particularities, and there's a through line from Trump to the founding of this country with regards to race. There's no question. And certainly the second founding with regards to the South and Reconstruction. And there's a fascism that never disappeared in continental Europe. And there is a literal neo-fascism in places like Brazil. And there is a massive, grotesque U.S. foreign policy over post-Cold War Russia, which helped metastasize a right-wing petrostate trying to reassert its positionality in the world. There's all these unique cases, but there is the through line is that there's sets of conditions that have been established of which there is no answer provided by the quote-unquote center. All right, let's get to the shout-out. Shout out, shout out, shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out, shout out, shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out, shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas like this.
Shout out, shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
He's so dumb.
The dial of ideas.
Dial of ideas. I hope you're on camera.
High-level.
Man, the crowd went crazy in Philly when we played this.
Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
Is that the banality of evil? Is Dave
It's
Rubin?
pretty damn close.
Yeah. I mean, like literally is that. Glenn Greenwald and The Intercept revealed the incredible corruption of Lava Jato, of the still serving Justice Minister Sergio Moro, and the political persecution of Lula da Silva and the Workers' Party. And even and there's a great, very important column in the New York Times today about the efforts of Bolsonaro and his allies to really just destroy Brazilian democracy and its free press that Glenn Greenwald wrote. And Lula has been highlighting as he's been back speaking with the Brazilian people. There's still a critical mass of Brazilian legislators that awarded Glenn Greenwald a merit medal, it was awarded to Glenn by his husband, David Miranda, who's a member of the Brazilian Congress. And this is just really awesome and really inspiring. And tonight's shout out, I think this is in Portuguese, so we'll have to kind of read some of the. I don't even know if it has subtitles. I think we're just going to play it. You just have to get the vibe of it, man.
Deputado Ivan Valente, o jornalista e escritor Glenn Greenwald recebe medalha Mérito Legislativo por meio do deputado federal David Miranda.
I mean,
Some applause there.
I mean, absolutely incredible, though. Glenn has faced such horrible attacks in Brazil and real threats, and has continued to
physically
expose
assaulted.
Truth. Yeah. and is fearless in these. And I think that people really need a lot more context if they're in their life, if they are still attacking Glenn Greenwald constantly online.
Oh, that's fucking pathetic. I mean, I look, if you're doing that, you need to go outside, take a shower. I mean, do anything else that I could say that's insulting. Between the NSA leaks, NSA revelations, the Intercept revelations, these are maybe the two most important stories. I mean, they are at least top 10 in terms of revealing extensive wrongdoing by two major governments and two major stories. Glenn has unbelievable physical courage. He does hugely important reporting. And the other thing that's amazing about Glenn is that he will happily argue with literally anyone. And all that is required is to not just go to him like a jackass, with whatever. He will literally argue with you about anything. And he's incredibly important, a good guy. His family's in danger. And we need to have 1,000% solidarity with Glenn Greenwald, David Miranda. So shout out to them. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with the great Nina Turner. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now, it's an incredible honor to have her, is Senator Nina Turner. She is national co-chair of the next president of the United States' 2020 campaign, Bernie Sanders. Senator Turner, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Michael, to be on your show. Really love your work and how you really, you take it to the neoliberals and the establishment type folks on a regular basis. And I just want to salute independent media. We need you guys so much these days.
We need you, and we're all really, really honored by that, seriously. And I want to start by just asking you basically about the state of the race. It was funny. I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, and I managed to go with some good friends to see the senator in East LA. And I was telling, we had a friend coming along with us who's an actor actually, and he was, he's not convinced yet. He's doing a little bit of fence sitting, unfortunately. And I said, wait till you see Nina, you'll be taken care of. And then you weren't there. But he saw Bernie, so it was cool. And I think we got him over.
Okay.
But
I probably was on another assignment at the time, but he got to see the man himself.
Yeah, so that helped a lot. But it feels like there is not only momentum, but steady, building, like built to last momentum. Is that a correct interpretation? How does it feel out there?
It really is. It does feel that way. I mean, the senator, as you know, and I know the folks that listen to you and watch you, he's a movement leader. I mean, he is running. This is his movement. Killer Mike said something that was fantastic when we were in the ATL this past week. And he told the senator supporters, you've already won. Now it's time to collect the trophy. So I can't say it any better than that. We have already won, and it's time to collect the trophy. And what he meant by that is that all of the ideas that the senator brought to life when he announced that he was going to run in 2015 and actually did that thing, he changed the dynamics. He changed what we can dare dream and believe that we deserve in this country. He did that. And so, but for his courage, his conviction, to get out there and make it plain that the workaday people of this nation deserve better than what they have been getting, we would not, the Democratic Party would absolutely not be talking about Medicare for all, even though we got half measure folks, and we can talk about them later. We would not be talking about canceling student debt, canceling medical debt, college for all, a Green New Deal, eradicating institutional racism in this country. None of those things, legalizing marijuana, and not only legalizing it, expunging the records of folks whose lives were forever changed because of the war on drugs, and particularly the damage that has happened in the African American community. So Senator Sanders and Killer Mike said it right. We have already won. Now it's time to collect the trophy. And the trophy is winning the White House and making him the 46th president of these United States of America.
Done. How do we do that? How do we collect that trophy? Talk about this movement, and how do we actually beat, I think it's so funny because I think people like us, we don't just fixate on Donald Trump because we know that there's so much more to do, but we also take beating him the most seriously. What is the movement, and how do we do that?
a multi-racial, ethnic, multi-generational coalition of people all across this country. Like people from all walks of life, those who have fancy titles and those who are the grassroots leaders of this nation. That is how we're going to win. And I know people get amped up when people like me and, other high-level folks are traveling the country on behalf of the senator, standing in that space. But it really is going to be the people who have the conversations with their neighbors, grandchildren having conversations with their grandparents and their mothers and fathers, their aunties and their uncles, proclaiming to them as to why Senator Bernie Sanders should be the 46th president of the United States of America. This is going to be a movement. He's a movement leader and is going to take a movement. Just earlier this week, our campaign became the first campaign to reach 4 million individual donations, making this campaign the fastest grown. No other candidate has done this at this particular time within the time period of a campaign. That says a lot, Michael. What that says is that the people of this nation have already chosen their candidate, and that candidate is Senator Bernard Sanders. So we got to keep those donations coming. We got to keep knocking doors. We got to keep having conversations. Social media is a beautiful thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a great way for us to expand our voice all across the world. But nothing beats good old-fashioned door knocking, picking up the phone, calling folks, standing in front of grocery stores and shopping malls. Black Friday's coming up. Let's make it real. Let's do some double duty this weekend and talk to people about why Senator Bernard Sanders should be the 46th president.
Can we talk about the people who are making those donations, the Walmart workers, the Amazon workers, the teachers?
Yes,
talk about that, please.
Talk about them. Starbucks, Amazon, Walmart. Those are the people working at those particular companies. Those are the top 3 donations come from people who work at Starbucks, Amazon, Walmart. And then the number 1 profession that donate to Senator Sanders, teachers. Come on now. What does that say? That these people, our sisters and brothers in these industries, our sisters and brothers in the teaching industry, they know who's going to stand up for them, and it's Senator Sanders, without question. We just got the endorsement of the UTLA, the second largest teachers union in the country, and then right beside them, just about, were our nurses. So I'm telling you, Michael, if we're not going to follow nurses and teachers, who are we going to follow? It's clear who's the champion, and it's Senator Sanders.
Yeah, it's really clear. And can you talk about that disconnect between what you feel and see on this trail and the actual energy of this movement? And I can even feel it just even doing the show and interacting with different people. We just did a live show in Philadelphia yesterday, and several hundred people came out. And believe me, there are people putting in an unbelievable amount of door knocking for Senator Sanders. And then, in the media, we have, conversations about strong fourths and various billionaires and people concerned about this and that. Has there ever been a bigger disconnect between this type of momentum and how the media is talking about it that you've ever seen?
No, not that I've ever seen. And, Michael, it really is the 24-hour news cycle and really the advent of social media itself as a tool. We know people start to campaign a lot earlier. It seems like perpetual campaigning. As soon as you take the oath of office, people are already talking about who's coming behind you. Some of that stuff is very disruptive to our lives. And I think social scientists are going to have a lot to say about some of the fatal flaws in having a 24-hour news cycle and always feeling like you have to be on. But I digress. Listen, that is why independent media like yours and others is necessary, because you give the truth, you give the balance that is not there. When people are touting a strong fourth, when you have Senator Sanders, who has consistently been polling either number 1 in many of the early states, strong number 2, tied, with other folks running in other states, but yet you have people in mainstream media who want to talk about a strong fourth. It is very clear that there is a Bernie blackout. We're not making this up. It is true. All people have to do is roll the tape. And I thank God that Common Dreams actually wrote a story about this with the empirical data for those who want to go visit Common Dreams and look at and read that article and look at the data points. This is not, somebody just making this up. We have the data that shows that no matter how Senator Sanders was just in New Hampshire, Michael, for example. Just in New Hampshire, I mean, mega people there, union workers there, dancing, right, getting his groove on, letting them know he got it. And do you think the mainstream media covered that? Absolutely not. They did not. So it's very clear that the revolution will not be televised in a traditional way, but it will be televised on the Michael Brooks Show. It will be televised on our individual social media outlets. It will be televised by other independent media sources out there, from bloggers to vloggers. We need all of you to continue to push Senator Sanders, and for folks not to get caught up on what they see and they do not see, because ultimately this race is going to be won in the streets, not in somebody's living room watching the mainstream media. But it is painful because earned media, you know, it does matter to a certain extent. And so it is very unfortunate, just because these folks don't want to see Senator Sanders become the next president of the United States of America, that they will not cover him fairly. All we're asking is for fairness here.
Absolutely. And do you think that we're, among other, like, we must be doing, and you guys absolutely are doing, and the senator is definitely doing things right? Because again, back to that beginning of the conversation, things are moving in the right direction. And it is, I mean, obviously Congresswoman Omar and Congresswoman Tlaib and Congresswoman, Ocasio-Cortez came forward and did those tremendous endorsements. But then there was the health scare, and it seemed like, I mean, it's been a glide path up since. And it seems like people are getting re-anchored in just like the basic elements of what's at play here. And I want to know, like, what are people you think responding to most? Is it the consistency and the credibility of the battle over 40 years? Is it the immediacy of the clarity that there's only one person that's going to fight for everybody to have health care, to cancel all student loans, to do something about public housing, to do something about rent control? What do you think it is that has really reshifted it? And how can we keep pushing that forward?
Come on, somebody. I mean, Michael, you just laid it out. It is all of the above. If I was taking a test right now, all of the above. That is what it is. I mean, our organizing team, is reporting that we made almost 8 million calls to voters as a team, and that includes our may I just shout out our wonderful, tremendous volunteers across this country who are doing the daggone thing. You talk about a grassroots movement. It is not just seen in the type of donations that we receive, but if you think about the woman and manpower that is being invested in terms of time, treasure, and talent to the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign, almost 8 million calls to voters, thousands of doors knocked. Hello, somebody. I support Senator Bernie Sanders, and this is why, and I'm asking you as my neighbor to do the same thing. And then, as you know, we have a Burn app. Almost 100,000 people are using that app. Over 17,837 volunteer-led events all over the country. 63 million text messages sent. Come on now, and 4 million donations to this campaign. It doesn't get more crystal clear than that. Who has the energy and the synergy and the momentum behind them? Because he does not equivocate. We know that what he says, you can take it to the bank, baby. And that's Senator Sanders, Michael. That's it. That's the movement. That's the only way we're going to win. And that is the only way we're going to get all of the things that you just enumerated, from Medicare for all, to canceling student debt, to canceling medical debt, to the Green New Deal, to legalizing marijuana, to doing something about expunging the records of people who went down on this war on drugs that disproportionately negatively impacted the African-American community, to the senator understanding that money has to go into a pot once marijuana is legalized, to make sure that the African-American community is made whole, to our HBCU plan. I mean, you name it, the senator is doing it. He is compelling us to understand this, Michael, and this is the point. We deserve it. Working class people from all backgrounds in this country deserve what Senator Sanders is his vision. They deserve this to be made real. And the only way that it is going to be made real, actualized, is if we all unite behind the leader that has had the courage and the conviction to fight this fight for well over 40 years. You're right. I mean, he was talking about Medicare for all in the 90s. He's not new to this. Right. He's true to this.
Can we talk a little bit in general terms? As you know, I do in very specific terms, but I will, leave the gutter to me. But let's talk a little bit about all of the other people who maybe are the half measure people, who maybe are the inconsistency people, who maybe are the people that were saying that poverty, as an example, is because poor people don't see great educational role models and all of this other trash, a million other examples I could use.
Yeah.
How much does that just reinforce both what we're up against, what the media is pushing, and also just the utter, I get physically sad when I see all of this other stuff. It's so out of step with what we need and what people are experiencing.
I do too, Michael, and I think that's why you and I, we're fighters, so we get it. It is disingenuous. It is a flat out lie. Anybody, I just had a dear friend of mine screenshot a medical bill, and I'm sure this won't shock you. 2 nights in the hospital, $27,000, almost $28,000. 2 nights in the hospital. So for these politicians who are running for the Democratic nomination, where we have almost 90 million of our sisters and brothers in this country are either uninsured or underinsured, where article after ABC just put out an article just a couple of days ago about how medical debt is crushing. And I think those were the words they used in the headline, crushing middle-class families. So for anybody to talk about Medicare for all who choose, or the freedom, we're talking about a freedom to continue to be at the beck and call of corporations who make profit hand over fist at the turmoil of people in this country. Is that the kind of freedom that we're talking about? Freedom to go bankrupt, and in some cases, freedom to die. So it is false what they are saying. We need a Medicare for all system in this country, bar none, and half measure is not going to do it. People using the word freedom to choose is not going to do it. We've been trying to do this for the last 70 years since President Truman. It is time out for this. People are suffering, Michael. And so for these folks who are on the stage, they just lying is what they're doing. They're trying to keep the status quo. And there's only one candidate who will not equivocate, who will not sell the people out, who won't say one thing on the debate stage and another thing off the debate stage. He will not sell the people of this nation out. We deserve this. Why is it that we can bail out Wall Street, but we can't even put a down payment on Main Street? Something is wrong with that. If we can give tax breaks to multimillionaires and billionaires in this country and starve out government, we can take that same money and invest it in the American people in this country for a time such as this. Do you know the millennial generation, they can't even hope in some cases. Some studies show that if we continue on this course, they won't even have the same level of quality of life that their mothers and fathers have had, that their grandparents. Now, one thing as Americans, we've always prided ourselves at least in saying that we're a nation of progress. If we keep on this course, we're going backwards. So it's time for folks to choose a side, Michael. Either you're going to stand up for the people or you are not. And all the smooth talking, because some of these folks, these jokers, they can talk a good game. But this is about who is willing to put it all on the line. Who has the anti-endorsers list? Only one, Senator Bernard Sanders. Who's been talking about Medicare for all since the 90s? Only one, Senator Bernard Sanders. Who's the one that doesn't change what he has to say based on what the polls have to say or consultants have to say, and whether or not it's hard or not? Senator Bernard Sanders. So he's the champion.
He has blood for this. Really quickly, I know you only have a minute left, but I just take us after we've collected that trophy, and maybe we've actually stayed on the streets and we do have an organizer in chief as president, and you're working and everybody is playing their part in realizing this agenda, and we've accomplished some of these things like student debt, medical debt, gone, healthcare. What do you imagine when you sit back and you actually visualize the realization of these goals? Because I think people on the left need to have, it's not going to happen without a huge amount of effort, but you also need to have that vision and positivity. That's what kept Bernie going for 40 years when people said, oh, look at you, you care about poor people. That's cute. Fighting against all of that. How do you see it affecting this country? We're in such a desperate, disgusting place in so many ways right now, but it could change so much.
It would. I mean, people will have more disposable income, Michael. If you are an entrepreneur and you just dreamed of, just going out on your own, or even at least giving it a try, nothing beats a failure like a try, as they say. you will have the flexibility to be able to do that with a Medicare for All system, for example. I mean, we can use many examples, but let's just use that one. You would be able to do that because you don't have to worry about your health care being tied to a job, or even if you have a job, worrying about whether or not your employer may change plans every single year, which does happen to millions of Americans who do have health care in this country. Your deductibles, premiums, co-pays, all gone. So you have, now that's true freedom, the freedom to be able to open up your own business if you want to. If you are a medical doctor, and I want to use one of our national surrogates who I know you're familiar with, Dr. Victoria Dooley, who tells the story all the time about her and her husband. They're both medical doctors, and between them, they have about $1 million worth of debt. So with Senator Sanders, not only do they support his Medicare for All program, but for a family like theirs who want to serve marginalized communities, but they also need to support their family and pay down debt. With senators, cancel student debt and not doing it by means testing, canceling it all, that will give somebody like Dr. Victoria Dooley the flexibility to be able to work in communities who need her most. That is what this vision is about. That is true freedom. And we are on the precipice right now. Transformation is right here, is right there, Michael. All we have to do is not only dare to believe, but dare to put some sweat equity behind this. I double dog dare the American people to dream this bigger dream and to go on this journey with Senator Sanders. He always says that not when I get to the White House, when we get to the White House, this is not about me, this is about us. And we will give in our time and also generations to come behind us. Can you imagine the next generations after we're gone talking about how in the 21st century, in the year 2019 through 2020, folks had the courage to dream a bigger dream, and that Medicare for All became the reality in this country. Canceling student debt became the reality in this country. College for All became the reality in this country. Oh my God. It's palpable, and we can do this. I don't want people, don't listen to the naysayers. I don't want to hear about what can't be done. I want to think about what can be done in the wealthiest country on the face of the earth. Michael, we can do this. We just got to put sweat equity behind this. I want people to go to BernieSanders.com. Please sign up. Join this revolution. As the senator always says, Michael, I'm going to end with this. We only have one life to live. We might as well have a political revolution. Now, I know there's a candidate out there talking about they not trying to push a revolution. That's okay, because there is a candidate who is pushing one. His name is Senator Bernard Sanders. If you are among the people in this nation who are suffering dirty water, if you are somebody that needs this health care, then what the senator is talking about is not radical. It's right on time. So let's elect the politician, the public servant who will be right on time for the greatest number of this people, who will not kowtow, will not bend, will not beg, will not grovel, and does not have to answer to the special money interests, the oligarchs of this nation. His only special interest is you.
Senator Turner, with these hands,
with
I had
these
to say
hands,
that.
baby.
I needed one.
With these hands, we will elect Senator Bernard Sanders, the 46th president of the United States of America.
Senator, I am so honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. We must do this again.
Please.
Can we do this again?
Are you kidding me? Anytime you want.
All right, darling. And thank you so much for what you do and for keeping all of us honest and for standing up for the people. Much love and respect to you. And happy Thanksgiving to all of your viewers and listeners. And let's make it a happy Thanksgiving for others along the way.
Have a great holiday. Please take some rest and have some fun. You're doing so much for us.
I'm going to try. Senator working assistant, but I know.
Yes, he is. Much love. Thank you.
Much love. Bye-bye.
Bye. I think, guys, now this is a good time if you've been hesitating on signing up to making calls. Knock on a few doors. She's amazing, man. I'm sorry. I stand without embarrassment, and I totally stand by. That's my VP pick. That's totally my VP pick.
She's the real deal, man.
Dude, this is a race where we have a college town mayor who's being thought of as being a legitimate president. And by the way, that's not the problem with him. If Pete Buttigieg was cool, that would be cool. Yeah. If Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington and he was running for president, I would support him. I like to make fun of him because of how few votes he's gotten, but whatever, who cares? I liked how Crystal Ball actually emphasized that point in Philly.
I was just saying, if Nina Turner was the mayor of South Bend, we'd support her, and also South Bend would probably have a better police department.
Yes. Yeah, if Nina Turner was the mayor of South Bend, she would be running for president. We would be supporting her, and South Bend wouldn't have all the problems that it's had, because it's really been a disaster. I don't know. I love her. She's the best. Awesome to have her on. Let's go to another amazing segment. The Gem with David Griscom.
And talk about another amazing candidate and movement too. I really want to take a little bit of time and dedicate it to this really exciting labor manifesto. Also encourage our listeners in the UK, please register to vote and do everything you can to make Labour the next government in power.
Please.
This is a really transformative plan, and we've seen so much cowardice for so many years from the Democratic Party of the United States and from the Labor Party before this massive swing of political activism and grassroots organizing that we've seen in the Labor Party. So I just wanted to hit real quick to start with the Green New Deal, what the manifesto starts with, and really emphasize that this is such an important part of the plan and is exactly the kind of thing that we need to be doing. I like this plan so much because it really recognizes that all the issues that we face very much are connected. So if we want to reduce our emissions and reduce the damage that our system is doing, we need to take our energy systems under our control. That's why the manifesto is going to democratize the water and energy systems in the UK and put those under democratic control, which is the only way that we're going to be able to implement the massive changes that we need to see across the UK, the United States, and the world. They're going to implement a new UK energy agency that will oversee and maintain the national grid infrastructure. They're going to create a national investment bank, which is going to be able to provide money to help people with this green transition. They're going to upgrade almost all of the UK's 27 million homes so that they're the highest energy efficiency standards. That will save people around £417 a year. This is going to be massively transformative for so many other people. And I also just want to hit real quick before we get onto the exciting stuff that they're doing with the economy in general. Nationalize the railways. Game changer. Absolutely needs to happen.
Game changer.
And ensure that councils can take public ownership of bus networks. Really taking something that's been controlled by private interests that has destroyed the planet into public control. That's the way that we're going to be able to deal with the massive crises that we see. Now we're going to move into this really transformative part of the plan that I love. Is the way that they're talking about tackling inequality and really empowering the working class. What I love about this labor plan is that they really hit three things. One, they're going to increase pay for workers. Two, they're going to lower the cost of living by decommodifying a lot of life and also just making services easier for people to have access to. And three, they're going to raise safety nets for most people. So, they're going to do important things like introducing a higher living wage for folks. They're going to fight financialization by cutting the amount that can be legally charged for overdraft fees or interest on a loan. So many people after this horrible recession, found themselves in massive amounts of debt, did not recognize or were were prey of really nasty lenders who are putting on these horrible interest rates on people who can barely keep their heads above water. So fighting against all these things is massive. But what's really exciting about this plan is the move to create worker ownership, at least of the profits of the corporations that they work at. So there's a really interesting proposal to create, make sure that all large companies create an inclusive ownership fund that will shift 10% of the ownership of the companies to the workers, meaning that they'll get paid dividends, which is something that could be so transformative for so many people. We talk a lot about the uncoupling of wages and profit, where dividend payments have just grown at such an exponential rate. What's going to shareholders, the amount of money that's going to shareholders has just increased so much across the UK and the United States. So bringing workers into that, and allowing them to profit from their own labor and taking that back from a group of people that is not selling their labor is a massive change that we'll see in the UK and could really significantly change the entire economic apparatus as a whole. Two, there's some really important structural changes that they're going to do. They're going to end miscategorization of workers. So basically all this nasty nonsense about making people independent contractors. They're going to make sure that all workers have the right to consultation before a new tech enters their workplace. They're going to ban 0-hour contracts, and they're going to increase people's personal time. So that's parental leave. That's giving people more time for grieving, and really significant extensions on maternity and paternal leave. And now, this is just so incredible. The this is the third part, right? So we've talked about increasing wages, increasing worker power. They're also going to pledge $1 billion to completely retrofit all of the houses so that they have fire safety after the horrible Grenfell tragedy. 100,000 new council houses will be built a year. That's going to make a massive shift in, one, the relationship between renters and landlords, and also deal with this horrible housing crisis that you're seeing in the UK. They're going to help ordinary people buy homes, and I love how they're going to fund this. They're going to do it by taxing international companies that buy housing in the United Kingdom. They're going to tax empty homes. They're going to fund renters' unions, implement rent controls, and introduce open-ended tenancies. So how are they going to do this? They're going to tax the billionaires, tax dodgers, the bosses, and the polluters. And now there's been a big freak out. You see in the FT, new headlines, alarmed city and business leaders after Labor's new manifesto.
That means that's a good manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. They've been threatening that they're going to leave the UK, which is nonsense. McDonnell had a good line on this, which is like every time that we talk about making any kind of transformative change, we always get all this hot air from the business community. And once they see that they implement these policies, they're really popular and they work out, they're going to sit down and shut up, right? And lastly, Gary Young also, I just want to quote him because he had a really phenomenal line too. When we're talking about these massive changes to the economy, everyone says, oh, well, what if this breaks the economy? And Gary Young said something I thought was so incredible. He says, when the 5th richest country in the world cannot feed its children, house its working poor, or treat its sick, its economy is already wrecked. So what we're seeing now is an incredible shift in politics across the world, really. But there's really an amazing opportunity in the UK to take away politics from people who have thrived on fear, the Tories, and give the power in that society, give the power back to the people that are not just going to fight back against all the nastiness that's been done in the past few years, but actually build something so much more beautiful than anything that has ever been done. 100% support for the Labour Party. Really, this is an incredible opportunity. Do as much as you can to make sure that this is the next government and Jeremy Corbyn is the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
It's urgently important. I also know it's quite late, obviously, in the UK. I guess actually the time is, I think it's actually probably already passed, so I'll forget that. But hopefully you've registered to vote. The deadline was midnight tonight. But I would urge you strongly to do absolutely every single thing you can to elect a Labour Party government. We're going to get to the pitch, which we'll do briefly, and then there's a really important GoFundMe that I want to talk about in a minute. But first, let's just do this. We'll do one more clip. This is another great reason to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, and this. I mean, Lula is an international, vitally important leader, and Brazil is ground zero of really this socialism or barbarism argument in many respects. Bernie is a remarkable figure, and America is still the seat of empire. But the UK Labour Party might be the most just sort of, straight to your veins for real upgraded social democratic, and in fact, some ways, genuinely democratic socialist vision of the 21st century. And you have opportunity to vote for them in the face of all of the lies, all of the smears, all of the trash press, the right-wing media, the right-wing financiers, and then this grotesque, embarrassing, bumbling trust fund baby prime minister. I mean, David Cameron was the same thing. Boris Johnson's obviously more fun. But outside of the UK, I mean, come on, guys. It's fucking embarrassing. This is a really powerful clip because Sir Richard Dearlove, who was the head of MI6, which is basically the UK CIA intelligence services, that stood by the Tony Blair government's systemic lying, which helped pave the way for the atrocity of the Iraq invasion, the Bush-Blair invasion of Iraq, which, yes, despite some idiots on Twitter and elsewhere, still very much matters today. It matters because it caused conservatively hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. I would say almost certainly at least 1 million. It caused a refugee crisis, and we are still living with the geopolitical consequences of it. So it matters. And Richard Dearlove took a shot at Jeremy Corbyn, and John McDonnell responded. Let's play this clip.
Before we go on with the rest of the interview, I did want to give you the opportunity to respond to an interview that we did a bit earlier in the show with Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, who said that he's troubled by some of Jeremy Corbyn's past associations, some of which he finds surprising and worrying. What's your response to those concerns?
Well, I'm not surprised. Look, this is a reactionary member of the establishment. So I don't think he'd welcome a Labour government of any sort, to be frank, and I'm disappointed with him, but there you are. Can I just say to him directly, I think he should spend his retirement in quiet contemplation of the role that he played with regard to the Iraq War, where over 500,000 people at least were killed. He was strongly criticised as the head of an organisation whose intelligence took us into that war. So I think he should have a bit of humility about the judgments he makes about individuals and others in the future.
Okay, some very strong words from you there, Mr. McDonnell. Now, I want to move on to...
Well, they were strong words. They were strong words. They were strong words from him, with the greatest respect. And if you look at the Chilcot inquiry, his organisation was strongly criticised for its role, and he was the head of that, and it had severe consequences, which we're even living with now. So I think he should spend his retirement with a bit of humility, quite honestly.
Yes. Vote for the Labour Party. That man would be Chancellor of the Exchequer. He would be in charge of all funding for public services, for reinventing the UK economy so it's fit the purpose in a way that works for the actual people of the United Kingdom, not just the oligarchs. It's the biggest no-brainer. And if you're caught in some Lib Dem myopia, get the fuck out of it and get serious. The Lib Dems are a disgusting partners of austerity, savage cuts, and they will take any Tory defector, by the way, no matter how anti-gay, no matter how xenophobic. They are not the party of preserving social tolerance. They're a party of cynicism, opportunism, and corporate servitude. Do not vote for them. All right, we have two quick pieces of housekeeping, and then the great Milton Allimadi is going to join us. But first, let's do these quick pieces of housekeeping, then we'll take a quick break, and then the long, finally, return of the great Milton Allimadi will happen. First, I want to talk about this GoFundMe. Can you guys get this up on screen? B Font, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, but that's at JayBFaunt. He's a presence. If you're a social media person, he's a Twitter presence. Very smart guy. Does a lot of advocacy for Bernie Sanders. He cares about Medicare for all and other vital progressive goals. And he's recently had a medical emergency. And because we live in this savage, grotesque healthcare system where health company CEOs are making hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars in profit, and we don't just take care of human beings in this country, he has an astronomical medical bill. And like so many others, he set up a GoFundMe, but I happened to notice it. I happen to appreciate Jay's contributions and ask him how he was doing. He's going through a lot. And so I just wanted to share this link, and, please feel free to help if you can. I will be later tonight myself, and maybe we'll tweet out the link later. So I just wanted to and wish him well, wish him a speedy recovery, and let you guys know. Do you want to read out that URL? Or maybe the best way to go would be to go to his Twitter, which put that up on screen again. That's at JayBefaunt, and it's pinned to his Twitter. Now, guys, we sold out Philly. It was an amazing show. I want to thank the incredible lineup: Artesia Balthrop, Crystal Ball, Emma Vigeland. What amazing guests. What an amazing crowd. It's so awesome to meet all of you. I want to thank Dominique Remy. Support her really amazing documentary project, The Canary Film, on race and infant mortality, capitalism in the United States. We also had a lot of fun. Some of those clips will be on YouTube. The first whole show is going to be for patrons. We filmed all of it, and patrons are going to get it. And the way you get it, and 3-to-1 extra content, is by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Do it today. I believe we're at I checked, we're at 3,139 as of showtime. And it's important and great that we just keep growing. It's really important what everybody in this ecosystem does, just like Senator Turner was saying, and really putting the emphasis on things that you're not going to get. I mean, it's stupid. You should be hearing from Milton Allimadi talking about Uganda, Libya, the United States, France, and China inside Africa. You should be hearing from him on our show, but also CNN, also the BBC, also every other network. But mostly you won't, because most media is trash. But we have the honor and privilege of doing really good work here, and also highlighting exceptionally good and important voices like a Milton Allimadi, or like a Nina Turner, or like a Drew Mikael, or like a Megan Day, who is going to be this weekend's primer guest, where we go deep into housing rights, the Green New Deal, and the new incredible work of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Ilhan Omar. Patreon.com/TMBS, Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Spread the word. Next week, we're announcing where our next live show will be. Let's sell out another one. It's a ton of fun. Really excited. The hint is bringing it home. Bringing it home. All right, we're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Milton Allimadi, founder and publisher of Black Star News. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. It's a great honor and privilege to welcome back our mentor and guide and friend, Milton Allimadi. He's the founder and publisher of Black Star News. He's an adjunct history instructor at John Jay College, history professor at John Jay College, and a frequent guest on all sorts of outlets, including our own, which is what I'm most concerned about.
Yes.
Milton, thank you so much for being back.
My pleasure. We love shows that have substance. And this is one of the few shows that got substance.
Honored.
Yeah, I'm honored, brother.
We're honored by having you and how much we learned from you. We've learned so much. There are some new people on the journey with us since the last time you were on, which has been way too long.
Mm-hmm.
We're never going to let it be that long again.
Right.
But can you just remind everybody of what Black Star News is,
okay,
where you're coming from, and your view of the world?
Okay, very good. Black Star News. Actually, I founded Black Star News after I'd worked in a paper called The City Sun, which is very well known in Brooklyn. It was owned by this elderly African-American brother, Andy Cooper. And I picked it up one day when I was a freelance reporter for the New York Times, covering Metro News. I said, what a paper, doing investigative journalism, doing analysis from a Pan-African, Afrocentric perspective. The kind of stuff that had a lot of substance, but you would not even see in the New York Times, you would not see in the Daily News, you wouldn't see anywhere. Some of the stuff you might see in The Guardian. I like The Guardian, by the way. So then I called him up, I said, listen, I want to work with you. He said, how much are they paying you at the Times? And I told him, he said, I can pay you a quarter of what you're making. And I said, sometimes it's not only about, the money, especially in journalism, right? So I stopped doing the stringing for the New York Times, and I went to the City Sun. And that was some of the best journalism that I experienced, analyzing trends in Africa, and then covering domestic news right here in New York City from in African-American communities. When I was doing Metro News, the only assignments I did were crime stories. And I said, there's more than crime going on in these neighborhoods, right? So that's why I appreciate the City Sun. And then when the publisher had a stroke, he couldn't continue the paper, I drew up a business plan, and I started sending it out to folks that I knew had deep pockets. And you'll be surprised to hear the only person that sent me a check, Camille and Bill Cosby.
Oh, man.
And that's how I started Black Star
Human
News.
Life is complicated.
That's how I started Black Star News.
And what year was that? 1990?
1998, 97, 98.
97, 98.
And
so you're starting as a physical newspaper.
I started as a physical newspaper, and then, of course, the internet became a big thing, and we were able to start breaking news. That I remember we did a story on some scandal on a Wall Street firm. At that time, it was called Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, it's Morgan Stanley now. I won't go to the whole history of the story, but anyway, all the papers had to quote what we were reporting in the Black Star News.
Yeah.
We broke that story. The New York Times had to, come back to us. The Wall Street Journal gave us a good write-up. And that's when we started really getting people now contacting us with serious news. So I think the hard work we put in helped us establish ourselves. But as you know, if you're not properly capitalized,
right,
you're always behind the curve. And, we've been decades behind the curve because we were never capitalized. We're just living on the news generating the attention, and that bringing in some revenue to keep us going along.
What's the worldview that drives you and Black Star News?
The worldview is that we should not cede control of the world to capital, monopoly capital, whether here in the United States or whether in Africa. And here, the capacity to resist is much more developed than in most African countries, where the dominance is overwhelming. It's no difference. People who watch that film by Raoul Peck, Lumumba, that the Belgian general, Janssens, Emile Janssens, before he was fired by Patrice Lumumba, he told the Congolese troops, he said, he wrote it on a blackboard, and this has actually happened, in real life, that was reproduced in the film by Peck. After independence equals before independence. And that's the situation that applies tragically in most African countries. The colonial state that was established in 1884 at the German in Berlin Conference in Germany, where the European powers of the day partitioned Africa, primarily the French, the British, Portuguese, and Belgians got the largest chunk, but other countries as well, Germany, Italy, Spain. And Africa was turned into a plantation, providers of cheap to slave labor, providers of raw materials, and consumers of manufactured products from Europe. That was 1884. 1884 exists today in 2019. Europe exports about 80% of manufactured products. In other words, products that are exported to Africa from Europe, 80% manufactures, and imports about 80% of raw materials. So you cannot change, you cannot uplift the quality of life if you still have a colonial regime applying to Africa's economies. So when people talk about independence for Africa countries in the 1960s, it was nominal independence. Africa is still fighting for its true independence. There's a classic title for a book written by Oginga Odinga in the 1960s, and the title was Not Yet Uhuru. Uhuru is the Swahili word for independence. Africa is not yet Uhuru.
Who are the main colonial players in Africa today? Is it the United States, China, and France? Is it?
Yes.
And what are the different methodologies that what do they each use to play the great game in Africa in 2019?
Okay, very good. France controls most of the former colonies in West Africa by controlling the economies. So in other words, I forget what the percentage is. I think at one point it was 80% of their reserves deposited in the French central bank, and France would then invest their funds on their behalf, and obviously they have no control over that. If things go wrong, too bad. But by being also so tightly tied economically with France, it means that the economic policy that is set in France, including whatever the value of the French currency is, affects all those countries directly. And occasionally when things get a little bit astray, of course, France either intervenes directly militarily, as it did in the Ivory Coast when there was disputed elections, and France favored one candidate. France intervened militarily. Mm-hmm. And France can also get other African countries to intervene on its behalf, as it did in Burkina Faso in 1987, when Thomas Sankara, who was seen as a challenge to the French vision of Africa, was assassinated by his supposed comrade, Blaise Compaoré. That was directly under the influence of France and the then president of Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, Félix Houphouët-Boigny. So that's how France exercises control economically, financially, as well as militarily, directly or through surrogates. China, China, by offering billions of dollars in loans, because China is greatly expanding economic power and needs a lot of raw materials, and that comes from African countries. So China is willing. In fact, I think China-Africa trade is about $150 billion a year, compared to U.S.-Africa trade, which is about $40 billion. So that gives you just an idea about the magnitude of China's involvement. China, some months ago, invited several African presidents to China and offered $60 billion in investments, supposedly with no strings attached. You know, that's an impossibility, of course.
Right.
Because you're going to end up mortgaging some of your major assets or utilities or mines, you know. So that's how China exercises its neo-colonial regime in Africa, which is very interesting because in 1960, I think I pointed this out in one of the earlier shows, and we both know that the figures like GDP, per capita income, they can be worthless, but at the same time, since they're uniformly worthless and distorted, you can use it as a comparison as well. So in 1960s, China's per capita income was about $90. At that time, Ghana's was 183. And today, of course, you know, Ghana is still Ghana. China is now a global power. Right. And because China, unlike African countries, China, after expelled European adventurers and colonialists, exercise control over its resources, and it's dictating. It engages the rest of the world on its terms, on terms that it has some influence and impact over, which African countries, not a single African country, does.
Do you think, and I want to get to the United States and AFRICOM and this new generation of colonial influence of U.S. and Africa, but before I mean, part of the reason, obviously, that China can do that is just because at the end of the day, it is, yes, it's thrown off its own colonial imperial history, but it's a massive, I mean, it's the largest country, certainly by population, I'm sure, in the world. I mean, I'd be super embarrassed if I'm getting that wrong, but China is huge. Does Africa, or I would add Latin America and the Caribbean for that matter, and people like Kwame Nkrumah and CLR James in a Caribbean context seem to point towards this, then they need to, and I think, and Lula and Chavez certainly look towards this. Do you need to see much more powerful continental and regional integration in order to accumulate that just kind of raw mass of coordination that China is able to do because of its scope?
Of course, absolutely. And people have advocated this. I'm reading right now Accumulation on a World Scale. I read it in college, but now I'm reading it. It's like I'm reading it for the first time.
Who wrote it?
It was Samir Min.
Okay, yeah.
I strongly recommend, if people want to ease into Samir Min, they could watch his lectures on YouTube. They're just phenomenal. I just realized as I'm reading him now that when I was in college, I didn't understand what I was reading because it's almost like reading.
Happens a lot, at least to me.
So
like, oh,
he was a big fan of that, and he said, in fact, in order for African countries to retain a substantial portion of the surplus, and that just means, if you have copper, you want to maximize the profits that remains in Africa. You have to obviously have independent, non-World Bank, non-IMF sources of financing.
Right.
Because in order to maximize your benefit from those resources, you have to use them as inputs in domestic production. So you don't just get the copper and load it up on ships after it's extracted from the earth and ship it to Europe or China in mass form. You want to use that to manufacture products. And when you do that, you're building factories. You're creating skilled employment. And by creating skilled employment, you're uplifting the income level of your citizenry. And they, in turn, have more money to now spend on other aspects of your domestic economy.
Right.
But in order to do that, you need capital.
Right.
And if you go to the World Bank or the IMF, you know what they're going to do. They say, cut subsidies on education, cut subsidies on healthcare. So you have in African countries now, people dying of treatable diseases. Forget HIV/AIDS and stuff like that. Malaria. People die of malaria because they cannot go to clinics that used to be free, because the World Bank says in order for you to get loans, you have to do ABC. They call it structural adjustment. It's outright murder. Yep. So Samir Amin was saying, in order to avoid that, number one, you need to cut down on the corruption, because that will also provide some sources of domestic funding.
Right.
But that is a relatively insignificant portion. The bigger portion is go to countries like Brazil. Brazil is now an emerging, I wouldn't call it power yet, but it's an emerging economy.
Right.
And it has significant funds. And in his analysis, Samir Amin also included China, actually. Yep. And says because China also wants to be part of a organization, whether it's formal or informal. I think they were starting BRICS, remember?
Yeah, the BRICS, right. And then also this whole Astana process, right, with the Belt and Roads connecting, right, Africa through Europe ultimately, but right, all of the Central Asian Caucasus. And
right.
Yeah.
Right. So he was suggesting that could be an alternative source of funding. It would not come with the conditionalities of the World Bank.
Right.
And finally, African countries would be able to industrialize. And in order to do that, as you suggested earlier, you have to increase your bargaining position with the rest of the world, number one. Number two, by coming together, maybe regionally first and then continentally, you now avoid the risk of exposing yourself to assassination, like we saw in the case of Thomas Sankara.
Yep. Thomas
Sankara came to power in 1983, and for people not too familiar with his background, I suggest they, just research, do some Google, go to YouTube and watch.
And we've done multiple really good videos on Thomas Sankara, excellent, including with you. We clipped an excellent overview. And there's a podcast we did on Thomas Sankara together.
Very good. So I suggest people look him up. And what he wanted to do in the few years that he was in power from 1983 to 87 in Burkina Faso was to first decolonize the minds of his citizens, which many African countries need, which many Africans in diaspora need. And this is to believe that they can do for themselves without having to wait for the green light from France.
Right.
You can grow your own food. Before the era of colonialism, which is relatively recent, actually, the last 20 years of the 19th century. That's when the colonial regime was imposed in Africa. You were growing your food centuries before that. So he had to remind them of that. And within 3 years, Burkina Faso was independent, food sufficient. You produce your own outfit. You can become active in controlling the environment, which was eating up the soil, plant trees, they plant 10 million trees. He made them participants in their own destiny, and they got to believe in themselves. So that itself was a problem. You know, the people that control the neo-colonial regimes in France don't like that kind of example. Yeah, it's a good example for the rest of Africa, but it's a bad example if you want to maintain a neo-colonial regime. But what became his death warrant was when he attended the 1987 Organization of African Unity meeting in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. That's the group that preceded the African Union. And there's a video on YouTube. If people look, Sankara and OAU meeting 1987, they'll see his speech. And it's in French, but there's subtitles. And he said, we need to do something about the debt, the collective debt that is burdening the entire continent.
Can we find that, guys?
Yeah.
Let's play a minute of that. Yeah.
We cannot uplift the quality of life of our citizens unless we deal with that. Yep. But if I challenge these lending countries, these institutions and Europe individually, I will not be alive to attend next year's conference. But if we do it collectively, and he says this, and if we do it collectively, they cannot assassinate all of us. And you see the African presidents kind of nodding and chuckling and clapping because they knew he was speaking truth to power. But guess what? He did not even live till the next year. That was in July. In October, he was dead. So when it comes to the issues of Africa being able to generate financing that is not tied to the World Bank, IMF, being able to reduce or eliminate the debt burden and actually industrialize, that is seen as a challenge that cannot be tolerated, because that would mean reducing the income of these major banks. That can't be tolerated. Africa industrializing, meaning the 70% that, as I said earlier, of exports from Europe to African countries would now have competition. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, it boils down to greed. The wealthier industrialized countries see any diminishing in the income in those countries as a threat. And any African leader who seems to have the knowledge, the will, determination, the credibility to start initiating that process, they're nipped in the bud. It happened historically. It happened with Kwame Nkrumah when he said, number one, and for people not too familiar with Kwame Nkrumah, he was the first leader of independent Ghana. Ghana was the first of the British colonies in so-called Black Africa to win its independence in 1957. And he said the independence of Ghana alone is meaningless unless all African countries become independent and they unite. Because if we don't do that, they will continue needing our resources the same way they did prior to independence. So they will go to every measure to make sure that they have access to resources, including direct military intervention, including using some African countries to undermine those that want to take a different path. And of course, the example I just gave you was Ivory Coast undermining Burkina Faso.
Here it is. Just what you're talking about.
Very
Here's
good.
Thomas Sankara. If you're listening, you will have to watch the audio because it's with subtitles.
Yes.
But we'll play about a minute or two of this.
Qui viendrait de la part de jeunes sans maturité, sans expérience. Je ne voudrais pas non plus que l'on pense qu'il n'y a que les révolutionnaires à parler de cette façon. Je voudrais que l'on admette que c'est simplement l'objectivité et l'obligation. Et je peux citer, dans les exemples de ceux qui ont dit de ne pas payer la dette, des révolutionnaires comme des non-révolutionnaires, des jeunes comme des vieux. Je citerai par exemple, Fidel Castro a déjà dit de ne pas payer. Il n'a pas mon âge, même s'il est révolutionnaire. Mais je pourrais citer également François Mitterrand, qui a dit que les pays africains ne peuvent pas payer, les pays pauvres ne peuvent pas. Je pourrais citer Madame le Premier ministre. Je ne connais pas son âge et je m'en voudrais de le lui demander. Mais c'est un exemple. Je voudrais citer également le président Félix Houphouët-Boigny. Il n'a pas mon âge. Cependant, il a déclaré officiellement, publiquement, qu'au moins pour ce qui concerne son pays, la Côte d'Ivoire ne peut pas payer. Or, la Côte d'Ivoire est classée parmi les pays les plus aisés d'Afrique, au moins d'Afrique francophone. C'est pourquoi d'ailleurs il est normal qu'elle paye plus en contribution ici.
Yes.
So that's exactly it. And you can obviously see the clarity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can tell, without even looking at the camera panning to the other leaders, you can hear the reaction.
Yes.
That they're actually appreciating and agreeing with what he said. Right. But when it came to soldiering forward, when he looked back, there was nobody behind him. No other African leader supported that, even though, as you heard from the clip, individually, they would make statements saying, you know, this debt has to go. So Thomas Sankara eliminated, Kwame Nkrumah eliminated, Patrice Lumumba eliminated in Congo in the most vicious way when he basically approached Union Minière, which was the Belgian mining giant, which was benefiting from the Congo's tremendous wealth. Congo's estimated wealth today is estimated at $27 trillion with a T. So he wanted to renegotiate these contracts, of course, and he was viciously killed for that. He was in power only for 3 months, overthrown, and then delivered to his nemesis, the U.S. Western puppet, Moïse Chambé, who, with the encouragement and support of France, had started a secession movement in Katanga. Katanga at that time was believed to be the wealthiest province with all the copper. Now, resources have been found all over the country, including Eastern Congo. But he was killed in the most brutal manner because he wanted...
an illicit history on this that I would recommend people watch with Milton leading us through it and Vic producing it. It's an incredible piece of work. Can you relate that to just closing the circle on the current... We went through the Chinese, the French. Right. What's the current U.S. colonial model?
Right.
And very much, I think, what a lot of people don't understand with things like AFRICOM and the amount of countries, including obviously Somalia, but elsewhere on the continent, with drone warfare, that the U.S. presence, particularly militarily, is very intense now on the African continent.
Right, very intense. So the U.S., more so than France, has the absolute military dominance in Africa. In fact, French intervention is normally now coordinated with the U.S. as well, with U.S. participation as well. U.S. has about 38, I think, military presence in 38 African countries. And the U.S., which partly now brings us, to Uganda, of course, the U.S. has outsourced a lot of the police work to Uganda. And Uganda is the very typical neo-colony governed by a puppet dictator who's been there for 34 years, Yoweri Museveni, pretty much like Mobutu, who served that role in the 1960s. You notice it doesn't matter how brutal you are to your own citizens and how destructive you are to your domestic economy.
Right.
That is not the criterion to have good relations with the West or with the U.S. Mobutu, the example, he was sustained in power from 1960. He became officially a leader in 1965. But in essence, from 1960, he was already
This is who
in
took
charge.
over after the great liberation leader Lumumba was savagely murdered. Then you had Mobutu Sese Seko
Right.
from 65 to 97?
To 97,
Yeah.
sustained by the U.S., by France, by Morocco,
Just looting
as
the
well.
country, torturing,
Looting the country,
murdering, but
torturing,
also
murdering.
loyal security and capitalist subcontractor.
Exactly, and he lasts long. Same thing with Museveni. He lasts long. He's very useful to the West. You mentioned Somalia earlier, and in Somalia, there are about 8,000 to 10,000 Ugandan soldiers stationed in Somalia doing the police work for the U.S. And every time he's challenged about human rights condition in Uganda, he says, "Well, do you want me to to pull out of Somalia?" And the answer is no.
Right.
So that's the card that he's been able to use, and obviously the U.S. and some of the EU countries as well, they subsidize the budget for the Ugandan military presence in Somalia. They provide the military equipment, the training, and also but the U.S. operates the drones. The drone strikes are entirely handled by the U.S., but that's the setup in terms of the U.S. presence. And then, of course, the U.S., as you saw, has had a big role in West Africa since the collapse of the Gaddafi regime, which the U.S., of course, was instrumental in playing a role in with the NATO attack. And since then, the U.S. and France have collaborated very closely in a lot of the military activities in North Africa and in West Africa. And it's about fighting, quote unquote, Islamic fundamentalism. It's actually trying to contain the destruction that was created by the destruction of the Libyan regime in 2011. But whenever you read about it, even in the New York Times, when you watch CNN, BBC, that part of the history disappears completely, as if they had no agency, no role in the calamity which is now engulfed much of North Africa and West Africa as well. It's just remarkable. Anybody with common sense could see that, yes, Libya is not a democracy by any measure under Gaddafi. Was it delivering on significant social services? Yes.
Yes.
It was.
Right.
And anybody could tell that the intervention would lead to what we see today, especially when you could tell.
What do we see in Libya today?
We see an utterly collapsed state. We see two entities claiming to be the legitimate government, one in Tripoli, supported by the United Nations and several other countries. But the real power is General Khalifa Haftar, who is supported by Egypt, supported by France, and supported by some of the petrodollar Gulf countries.
And the United States now. Under
and the
Trump,
United
right?
States now.
Yep.
So the United States officially supports the Tripoli government because that's a UN-supported government, but actively supports Khalifa. And of course, Khalifa has a very interesting history. He was one of Gaddafi's top comrades when they seized government in 1969. He was one of those idealistic young officers in the Libyan army when they overthrew the monarchy. And this part needs to be mentioned. Libya became, I believe, the first country at that time to make sure that it had majority interest in petroleum production. That was very significant. And that's how the wealth that was subsequently generated came into being. It was after that action. And then the other major oil producers followed the same model So that was actually, ironically, after the Libyan revolution of 1969. So they were close comrades. But then in the late 1970s and part of the 1980s, Libya was trying to expand into Chad and seize a disputed territory called the Azu Strip, which had actually been ceded to Libya when it was still under Italian colonialism by France, which was controlling Chad. But the deal was never ratified.
It really does start to I read a lot of mafia stuff, and it really does just start to sound like, and then the Colombos negotiated, and then
absolutely
they got that horse track because they did a trade-off to give some bookies to the Gambinos. That sounds exactly.
Well, that was the colonial enterprise, including the Berlin Conference. You know?
No, right.
So, but that deal was never finalized. And why was France offering the Azu Strip, which is believed to be rich in uranium? Because they wanted to keep Mussolini out of the Nazi camp. So this was in the early stages. Eventually he went, of course, that's your history. He went to Hitler's camp. So Gaddafi wanted that strip to become now part of Libya. Mm-hmm. And of course, France was not going to have part of it, even though Chad is now normally independent. Chad is a former colony of France, which equals contemporary neo-colony. So France helped Chad to defeat the Libyan invasion. And
what year is this?
This is, I think the war ended in 87, finally.
So this is the 1980s.
Yeah. Right. And Khalifa was captured. He was I don't know what his rank at that time, maybe he was a general, even though Gaddafi himself never promoted himself beyond colonel. I think others may have had that title. I'm not absolutely sure, but he was actually the commander of the invasion force, Khalifa. He was captured by the Chadian military. And I think he believed Gaddafi did not do enough to try to secure his release.
Right.
So when he was eventually released, and the U.S. may have played a role in securing his release, because he ended up here in the U.S., living very close to CIA headquarters. Okay, so that was that.
Some convenient location.
Right, very convenient location.
Right.
So
That's
fast,
helpful.
Extremely helpful.
I wonder if John Krasinski ran into him. Maybe that was later. Yeah.
So now we fast forward to the 2010-2011 NATO war.
What's happening with that NATO war? What drives it? And what is it? Is it a petroleum grab?
Absolutely.
What is the balance between that and the uprising against Gaddafi, and also Gaddafi's own crimes, but also how it spilled into I just want to put everything out.
Okay.
How it spilled into Mali.
Okay.
Then also, how does it flip on a dime? Because before that, they brought Gaddafi back in.
Absolutely.
Gaddafi actually aids, the Blair government is implicated in sending UK citizens, I believe, at the very least suspects, Libyan descent, back to Gaddafi to be tortured. The U.S. is having great relations with him. Everybody is cutting oil deals.
Absolutely.
And as always, obviously, just the same pattern. No one cares about any of these human rights issues when there's deals to be cut.
And the year before, or the year before, or 2 years before, Gaddafi, remember, went to France.
Yes.
Met Sarkozy, entertained with a huge delegation. They signed all these business deals with French
well, that was the other thing that I wanted to ask you. Is this as simple? Because there was a criminal probe in France that Sarkozy was taking illegal cash donations from the Libyan government.
Yes.
Was this? I mean, when I first was this as simple as Sarkozy trying to whack the guy to take out his crime?
That absolutely was part of it.
What happens?
Without a doubt, everything
2010,
you have said,
2011.
Nothing you said is mutually exclusive.
Yes.
Everything you said all add up together.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And you've actually pretty much laid out most of the elements already. There was the Lockerbie issue, you remember?
Right. Right, of course.
Was that in 88, I believe? And even up to now. And I think both Al Jazeera and The Guardian have done extensive reporting on this. And there's a huge question as to whether Libya was actually involved in that bombing. And these aren't outlets that indulge in so-called conspiracy theories. So people can go back and read some of the work that The Guardian has done and Al Jazeera has done as well. But nevertheless, I think Gaddafi saw that the price of paying the compensation to the victims, and obviously if you pay compensation to the victims, you are accepting, you're
liability, accepting responsibility for the terrorist act. Yeah,
absolutely. So that's what happened. Paid that money, and after that, as you already enumerated, relations began to be repaired.
And Tony Blair is going, and John McCain is going. I mean, this is tight.
Sanctions were lifted. And why are they going? Because this is a country with phenomenal reserves, billions of dollars. This is a country, and I always have to qualify it, even though these per capita statistics may not be that meaningful in some aspects, sometimes you can use them for comparison. It's a country where the per capita income was more than $11,000 to $12,000, which is very significant in an African country. If you say, for example, Uganda, where $700, and it has hundreds of billions of dollars just in reserves. And it has a sovereign fund, a wealth fund, which all these major money management firms, all these investment banks want to manage. I think Morgan Stanley actually was either Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. One of these two big players was managing significant parts of this fund. So relations had normalized. So to me, when they talk, first of all, this talk that the NATO intervention was to prevent Gaddafi from committing massacres in Benghazi. Okay. How can we now disprove that was the main motivating factor? If they care that much about Libyan citizens being massacred, why are you standing aside today as thousands of Libyans are being massacred on a daily basis? Where is that urgency today to do anything?
Well, there's literal slave markets now.
Think about
in Libya. Literal slave markets.
And let me comment very briefly on the slave markets too, which I find very ironic. And we should be very thankful that we have media outlets like this, which people can come to listen to, watch, and get substantive information, and listen to people pose the questions. CNN was awarded the Polk Award for breaking this news about the so-called slave markets in Libya, where they're auctioning richly melanated Africans, right?
Right.
But the same CNN never mentioned when the same Africans were being lynched, were being beheaded during the war, the NATO war on Libya. To its credit, the Wall Street Journal was the only major U.S. or Western media outlet that did so. And I give them credit today.
Right.
The reporter's name, Sam Dagger. He was there. The other correspondents were there. They were not reporting it. He was reporting it. So that to me shows that was an editorial decision. I can't imagine a serious journalist observing something like that, becoming aware of that, and not reporting it. No. I think reporters censor themselves when they know that the editorial staff would censor or kill the story anyway. That's when they start reporting it. You can't go and see people being decapitated and then pretend you don't see it. It doesn't make sense.
And
so,
all of the things that have flown out of Libya from Mali and Chad and destabilization there, but also some of these groups, the proliferation of certain, you know, I'll just say right-wing Islamic conservative, you know, groups who engage in terrorist actions. That also reverberates out to this broader regional and quote unquote refugee crisis. So you can even correlate it with this rise in xenophobia, the far-right parties, and so on.
Yes, absolutely. And look at this. I'm glad you brought that up. Gaddafi had a deal with the U.S. Many of the more radical elements who were engaged in, you know, acts of terrorism, who had been arrested by U.S., had been sent to Libya for incarceration by Gaddafi.
Right.
And when the conflict started, the NATO war, and I'll go to the Arab Spring as well, that you hinted at, so I'll come back to that in a second. Some of the people who had been incarcerated after they were released were interviewed, and there's a very interesting story in the Wall Street Journal as well. I'm not sure if it was written by the same Sam Dagger. People should Google him, read the stories he wrote during the conflict. I think his last name is spelled D-A-G-H-E-R. But there was an interview by one of the folks who had been released to Gaddafi's custody by the U.S. And he said, we used to hate the U.S. 100%. But now that it's supporting this war against Gaddafi, I forgot what, maybe only 20%.
Only 20%.
I don't recall.
We'll take the weapons you're giving us now and we'll use them against you later.
Exactly. And that's the point I was getting to. That's exactly what happened.
Right.
So they embraced all these elements that when at the time of the insurgency, the New York Times, in some articles, referring to them as freedom fighters. Freedom fighters, knowing the composition of the leadership. These are the same folks who had been released to Gaddafi's. But as they say, you know, my bad guy is still my bad guy. Anyway, right?
Right.
So that's what it boiled down to.
Do you think it was as simple as, even though there had been this rapprochement and there was all these mutually beneficial arrangements, and again, we're not, of course, Gaddafi engaged in plenty of human rights abuses, but we don't care from the United States and France does not care about that. I mean, another example I give, right during the Arab Spring, we were, you know, literally supporting the Bahrainis. It was less dramatic, but it was a very vicious crackdown, very analogous to what the Iranians are doing right now, which again is terrible, but of course is not going to get reported. I mean, the Bahraini thing was barely reported.
Absolutely.
The Saudis sent in troops. They helped put it out. The U.S. continued to sell arms to them the whole way through. They don't care about this stuff.
And who are we supporting today in Yemen?
And what are we supporting today? We're supporting genocide in Yemen today.
Because the Saudis are our guys. But continue.
So was it just an opportunity that even though things were working, that they still could just drive? They saw the opportunity to just say, like, Gaddafi still is somewhat independent-minded. He still is going to cut better deals for himself and his country.
Yes.
Let's just get rid of that.
Yes. And I point to two elements. Number one, I forget whether it was Newsweek or Time reported that the U.S. had waived, the Treasury Department waived a certain requirement, I don't remember what law that is, that now allowed U.S. companies to start signing oil deals even before the Gaddafi government had been deposed and replaced. And the folks who were leading the umbrella organization that brought in all these factions fighting against Gaddafi also made statements saying, we are going to apportion the oil concessions based on the level of support we get from each one of these countries that are not supporting us. So that article is out there.
There you go. There you go.
You know, I just forgot the date, but the article is there. Anybody can look it up very easily. So that's number one. Number two, they wanted to get rid of Gaddafi by that time at all costs, thinking the benefits of getting rid of him outweighed absolutely any alternative scenario. Because the African Union actually sent a character who is not a good character, our friend Jacob Zuma, but he happened to be president of South Africa.
Yes. Yes.
So they sent him to negotiate with Gaddafi. And at that time, NATO had already imposed the no-flight zone, so he had to get permission. Hey, guys, don't shoot me down. I'm going to negotiate with him. They gave him permission. So he went. He went twice. And Gaddafi agreed that, okay. Agreed to an internationally supervised election, agreed to ceasefire, agreed to humanitarian corridor and all that.
Yep.
Agreed to all the conditions that he would not run the elections himself, but he could be a candidate.
Right.
But that was not enough.
Right.
Because there was the risk that he might actually win,
right,
even in an internationally supervised election.
Right.
So that African Union deal did not get much coverage. I think it was on page 12 in the New York Times, a small little thing.
Yep.
Because at that time, mind you, the New York Times was publishing editorials admonishing NATO for not bombing enough to end the war expeditiously. Mind-boggling that a so-called liberal publication, and I know there's supposed to be the separation between editorial and the folks that write the editorials. But this is crazy. I don't think even the Wall Street Journal, which is notorious for some of its editorials, wrote an editorial like that.
Right.
So you could see why that alternative African Union plan was not going to get any play, and it did not. It was totally ignored. So it was get rid of him at all costs. So those are the two elements that I use in answering your question. You know, get rid of him at all costs, even though the rapprochement was underway.
Was underway
at that time. And of course, it coincided with the Arab Spring. So that also provided the umbrella and the excuse to say, this is part of the Arab Spring process, which we're supporting generally. And Gaddafi just happens to be one of these dictators who's opposing it, just like the guy in Tunisia, just like Mubarak in Egypt.
Milton Allimadi, you going to hang out with us for the post game?
Yes, of course.
I'm honored, as always.
Absolutely.
You can we'll have links to Black Star News, to Milton Allimadi's Twitter, and of course,
at Allimadi.
At Allimadi. Follow him now. If you're lucky enough to take his course at John Jay, you should take it.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that.
Of course.
My students come there. I ask them, what's the first thing you think about Africa when you're here? They talk safari. At the end of the semester, everybody wants to go searching for Blaise Compaoré, who killed Sankara.
Yes.
That's the level of evolution that occurs just in one semester. So I have great faith in the youth of the world.
That's and we someday figure out how to get you a damn podcast.
Hey,
really, we really do. I mean, it's insane. I mean, I'm not I don't know why I always have to turn everything into like a jerky direction, but I'll just be real. Every day I see a new podcast that doesn't necessarily need to exist, and I think to myself, Milton Allimadi doesn't have a podcast.
We will work on it, bro.
Let's make that. No, seriously, it's really I see because what. Well, I know that Black Star News can be, just all of the few small tweaks, because all of everything is there. It's already a legacy thing.
Much appreciation. And now, if I can plug also,
please.
Beginning, I've actually done a few shows already. Every Thursday at 10 a.m., I will have a show on WBAI 99.5
Oh, great.
FM. So this week, no, but next week, We'll have a show, and every Thursday from 10 a.m. to WBI.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's great. All right, that's the first step. Okay, excellent. WBI. And can people listen to that online as well?
Yes, WBI.org.
What's the name of the show?
It's Black Star News Show.
Black Star News Show. Boom. Done. Okay, check it out. Folks, become a patron today, patreon.com/TMBS. I want to thank the whole crew for making it possible. I want to thank each and every one of you for making it possible. Thanks to everybody who came in Philadelphia. That was amazing. And of course, we want to thank the great Nina Turner, who watches this show. You heard it.
Oh, that's
great. We'll see you in the post game.
That's great. I like it.